Hello, I'm Charles Bowman and welcome to another special episode of Off the Agenda. Today, we're back in the City of London, home to the UK's globally renowned financial and professional services sector, and I am delighted to be joined by Dean Forbes, CEO of Fortero. Dean's is an extraordinarily inspirational story. Twice homeless in London as a teenager, failing to make the grade as a professional footballer and debt-ridden as a result, Dean transformed his life in the space of just 20 years through a role as a junior call centre sales executive at Motorola to CEO of billion-euro businesses. He puts his remarkable success in business down to the drive, determination and the desire to prove himself. Quickly scaling the Motorola corporate ladder, he moved to US tech company Primavera, where he excelled at sales, taking on leadership roles which ultimately saw Forbes overseeing the firm's sale to Oracle for a reported $550 million in 2008 when he was just 30 years old. From Oracle to KDS and from KDS to core HR, Forbes has continued his business success, becoming a darling of the tech sector and the venture capital deal. In March 2021, he was appointed CEO of Forterro, a European-focused software company which under his leadership achieved aspirational tech unicorn status in February 2022 when it was acquired by Partners Group for €1 billion. Beyond Fortero, Dean serves on the board of Cornerstone VC, partners with Cortland Capital, and acts as the chairman and co-founder of the Forbes Family Group, a platform dedicated to driving positive social mobility in the communities it serves. Dean's outstanding achievements were recognised when he was named the most influential black man in Britain on the Power List of 2023. And it is my great pleasure to welcome Dean Forbes to Off the Agenda. Dean, can I start by saying thank you very much for joining us on Off the Agenda. It's an absolute delight to meet you today. And I'm going to take you back to your earlier years, which by your admission were very challenging. In your teens, you and the family found yourself homeless twice. You were living in shelters and hostels in southeast London. How did you manage those early years, your education, your school and your studies throughout those challenging times?
You know, it's funny, Charles, it's only as an adult looking back on that experience, you have kind of a full appreciation for what was happening at the time. My mum was such a phenomenal force of nature that the reality of what was happening around us wasn't really apparent to us as children. So I look back on some of those times, you know, in hostels, in temporary accommodation, in difficult circumstances, as actually some of the most fun periods in my life, because she did so much to shelter us from that. We played hide and seek in the dark at home when we didn't have electricity. And despite everything that was going on around us, she was absolutely adamant that we had to get a good education. And again, looking back on it now as an adult, in everything that was going on, all of that adversity, all of that, all the economic struggles, it was kind of insane to have such a high educational expectation of her children, but that's what she had. So that just became our normal, and we kind of enjoyed it, and we lived one day to the next on a bit of an adventure. And it's only now looking back that I have any appreciation for how difficult that period actually was.
Your mother's influence, and clearly it was about making a virtue of circumstance, and it sounds as if you, she and the whole family did.
Yeah, she never paused to kind of consider the enormity of the issues that she was facing. She was kind of a one foot in front of the other person all the time, and I think, you know, that really rubbed off on me, and something I've probably carried in my life and career as well.
That's fantastic. Well, as a young person, moving a little bit on, making the decision to give up what was proving to be or hoping to be a promising career in football, and then joining Motorola as you did in a junior telesales role, must have been very difficult. What were the factors that influenced you in making that decision, and how did you handle the transition emotionally?
It was a very difficult time. That is definitely a moment in my life where the adversity and the kind of rejection was very apparent, and I really, really struggled with it. And it happened in two forms. In the first form, I actually didn't get to make the choice to leave Crystal Palace. That choice was made, made for me. I was kind of injured at the time, so for years I hid behind that as the reason. And then I went on trials up and down the country to try and find another club, and nothing materialized. And at a moment in time, you sit down with family and friends, and they help you realize that economically you might have to move on with your life. And it was really that moment where the weight of my dream kind of moving beyond me landed. So that was very difficult emotionally to deal with that transition. And then going from a vocation like football, where you pretty much mess around every day with a group of friends, to being in an office environment, and was probably one of the hardest things I think I've ever had to deal with.
And you had some financial pressures, I know, at that moment in time. And indeed, many young people today face financial issues, financial pressures at moments in time in their life, whether it's keeping up with peers and so on and so forth. How did you manage that moment, the stresses and strains of the financial burdens you were carrying with you at that moment in time? And what advice would you give to young people in a similar situation?
I'm very grateful to the debt that I had at that moment in time, right, which was £89,000 of debt as a 17, 18-year-old through just absolute reckless endeavour. There was no good reason for having that debt. It was exactly as you described, keeping up with friends and colleagues. But I'm very grateful for the debt. It's because of the debt I didn't continue to pursue my dream. It was kind of a cold shower moment of, you're under this mountain of debt, pursuing this dream isn't economically viable right now, you need a reliable and steady income. So that cold shower is what forced me into work, right?
Yeah.
Had I not had that, I probably would have tried to find my next calling for a period of time, but I didn't have the luxury of that. I also had an agent at the time who really kind of forced that message home, right? So again, I was really lucky, because a lot of other young footballers, their agents were incented to keep chasing a contract for them. Mine took a bit of, I guess, paternal care and said, if you don't get ahead of this debt, it's going to live with you for a good portion of your life, and that wouldn't be good. So well advised, plus the enormity of the situation meant I didn't have time to consider many different options.
Well, that's very healthy to hear about the importance of the mentor and mentorship role that your agent played in being honest with circumstance and situation.
Yeah, absolutely. And as I'd grown, under that tutelage, it was just one foot in front of the other time now, right? We've got this debt, we've got to go to work, and we've got to figure out how we're going to service it.
And that actually brings us on very neatly, and that's probably you've answered the question that I wanted to ask in any event, but I will do it so. Failure often seen as a negative experience, but you've mentioned very openly that in your case it played a very significant role in your own professional development. How did you actually embrace that? How did you use it to your advantage?
There were a few different elements. So one was pride, right? So I grew up in a group of young men who all wanted to be footballers, and the majority of them went on to do that. And I was the one that came out of the pack as the failure. So it kind of lit a candle of pride inside of me to say, okay, you've got to go to work and re-engage with that pack at some point as a success. So that was one role that the failure played. The other role it played was just educational. So years after my football career ended, I came to terms with the fact a big part of the reason I didn't make it was I didn't apply myself. Right? I didn't train as hard as some of my friends trained. I wasn't as obsessed with being great as they were. I wasn't living the life of a young athlete who wanted to have an elite long-term career. My application and my work ethic was off. So I kind of figured out if I was going to put my energy to something else, I wouldn't make that mistake again, right? So, failure for me was hugely motivational and educational. And what I say to people often now is, there's nothing wrong with failing and having a downturn because of that failure, but your job is to come out of that failure, as soon as possible, right? Don't fear being in that downward spiral. Don't fear the failure.
Yep.
Unless it becomes oppressive and that downward, trajectory continues. It's all about the bounce and how you use what happened to you to make yourself better the next time you find yourself in that
That's
situation.
fascinating. Learning from it, making again a virtue of the circumstance of it all.
Absolutely. That's how a failure can become such a positive thing, right? And that is absolutely how I view it. If you live in a or through a difficult moment in time, you can work to make that moment in time one of the best things that ever happened to you, right? You can work to make that, something that you're grateful for instead of something that you're kind of remorseful of.
That's fabulous advice. But at the very young age of 29, you became a VP, a vice president at Primavera, a private company providing project portfolio management software. And this was subsequently, with your influence there too, acquired by Oracle in 2009 for reported $550 million. And you then became a GVP at Oracle itself. How difficult or easy was it for you to navigate your way through those roles and those organizations? And what experience did those specific roles themselves do to help shape your future ambitions?
Lots. And again, it's kind of about the learning, right? So Oracle still is one of the greatest software companies, on earth. Certainly from a commercial perspective, it's just an immense place. So I learned so much. In a year at Oracle, I learned more than maybe in the previous 8 years about doing business, getting deals done, working with customers, building technology. So it's hugely educational. The other reason it was educational is it's a huge company at the time, 80,000 employees.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of bureaucracy inside of Oracle, right? There was a lot of process and a lot of systems because it was a huge publicly listed company. So the other thing I learned is I don't like companies like that. And I'm not very effective in environments like that. So it did a bit of environmental conditioning for me. So it was another learning. And the third thing, I got to work with and for a guy called Charles Phillips, who was president of Oracle at the time. A black guy just like me, the most senior ranking black exec in the tech space at the time. And through almost serendipity, I ended up reporting to Charles. So I got to just watch Charles at work, and he was one of the most gracious, efficient, yet ferocious business people I got to watch at work. And it's probably 15 years now, and I can remember micro engagements I had with Charles and things he said and things he did and his mannerisms. And that was the extent of his influence on me.
What a wonderful story to hear. That is a wonderful story. And in your 20-year career, you've been remarkably successful, transforming a number of different businesses, building them into great success stories for investors. You're often referred to as the darling of the venture capital deal, and delivering over $2 billion worth in transactions you've been engaged with. An extraordinary achievement. Can you perhaps give our audience a view, an explanation as to how you've been able to seize those opportunities? What was it that made you spot the difference, spot the opportunity, and deliver against it?
I'm not concerned about difficult environments or adverse environments. I grew up in, tough situations. I grew up around, people who were used to hardship and used to difficulty. So organizations that are underperforming, that need a degree of transformation, that are going to take 8 days a week and 25 hours a day, that doesn't worry me. And there are other executives who might even be more, talented than me and more able to drive that kind of turnaround, who don't have an appetite to go into that type of environment whereas I do. And once I'm in, I often talk about two things. One is, all you really need is a single and executable path to success, right? You don't need 20 options. You need one path that you can walk that will get you to success. And I think I've been good and lucky over time, with the help of a great team, to find that path and just kind of walk it relentlessly despite the headwinds that sometimes these companies have to deal with. So it's a combination of having a really, really good team. I've always had teams better than me or the opportunity deserve. And I've always been very relentless that if I can see the path out of this situation, that I'm pretty pretty
Pretty clear.
committed to walking that path.
Yeah. That's a great story, and particularly around building your teams beneath you too. And of course, you're now currently serving as CEO of Forterro, a leading European provider of mid-market manufacturing ERP solutions. That's supported by Battery Ventures, which again, under your leadership, achieved that sort of aspirational unicorn or tech unicorn status when it was bought in February 2022 by Partners Group for 1 billion euros. Perhaps can you tell us a little bit about the Forterro story and what your own aspirations are, your own visions for that phenomenal company as you continue at its helm?
Yeah, Fortero is a great business that was built entirely through acquisition. So today the company is composed of 14 different product lines, all of which were acquired. So many software companies are built by great founders who had a great idea. Ours is kind of 14 of those in a group structure. What's absolutely remarkable about Fortero is it serves what we call the SME space in industrial manufacturing, wholesale, and distribution. So these are typically businesses that are run by first, second, sometimes third generational family members, right? So a person at a point in time founded this business because they wanted to make, something, doors. They wanted to make, glass panels. They wanted to make components that go into engines. And we find ourselves 1, 2, or 3 generations further down the line, still serving that company, often in close to its original form. And why I think that's so exceptional is because if you look at all of the economic downturns that major economies go through, it's almost always that category of the economy that keeps the whole thing afloat, right? Those smaller businesses, those entrepreneurs who had the courage to start something, weather it through difficult times, and hand it on to generations. It's almost always the SME, the mid-market that props up the economy. If you look at COVID, the mid-market outperformed the FTSE and the NASDAQ, right? So these are the businesses who keep the world turning, who keep us safe, who make sure we get the things that we rely on, we like, we love. So it's just a privilege to be building a company that is really, really focused on helping them to be successful, especially having been in companies like Oracle where the cream was the major enterprises, the household names, the blue chip companies. It's nice to be here serving a set of entrepreneurs who I think really deserve the care and attention. I hope we build a company that can give them.
That's a very exciting story and a great vision and a very clear picture of the success and the building foundations that support that success. And you've recently been recognised in the 2023 Power List, where you were ranked as the most influential black man in Britain. That's an extraordinary achievement, and you pipped the likes of Marcus Rashford, Stormzy, and Idris Elba to that particular post. Congratulations. I was keen to ask how you will use that sort of recognition and your continued success to influence and impact on society more broadly.
Yeah, I wasn't always a fan of these lists that kind of divide the population, especially underrepresented communities. But having been involved with the Power List and seen the impact it has on generations coming behind people like me, I've really kind of tuned into the importance of it and the power of representation. So it's created a kind of shift in my mind. And now what's happening because of things that have happened at Fortero, my career, and the Power List, I find myself in this position where, again, 2 things are happening. I'm kind of invited into conversations that are quite meaningful, in society. I spent some time with some of the politicians who run the country recently, talking about how they can address some of the socioeconomic issues that we have, with the mayor about how our city is policed. And these are conversations now I'm able to participate in because of the career I've had and because of some of the recognition. And I think what I'm able to do is bridge the gap between kind of the boardroom and the corporate space and what's still happening on estates like the one I grew up in and among working class people like the majority of my family and friends. And being able to speak to both sides and still be hopefully relevant to both sides, I'm finding, rewarding, because I'm translating, what is needed and what people mean on both sides of the fence. And I think that is a place, I hope to be helpful in those kinds of discussions. And at a personal level, through FFG, I'm really obsessed with using my network to connect upcoming entrepreneurs and young professionals with people who can have an impact on their career trajectory, in a similar way to how people have impacted mine. So those are the two ways I hope, to make sure that I use this position and this platform to help those who are coming.
Tremendous story. And mentioning FFG, that is the Forbes Family Group, which you set up in 2020. It's a not-for-profit organisation aimed at investing in social mobility and levelling the playing field, is I think the way you describe it, across the UK, particularly for underserved communities. Perhaps you could explain a little bit more about how that started and what its aims and ambitions are today.
Yeah, absolutely. It came out of that recognition that, I've had this amazing career, I've had these amazing opportunities, amazing experiences, I've now got these amazing connections, and I was asking myself the question, how do I put all of that, to good use, right? How can I put that to kind of maximum impact? And my career is absolutely a product of people who showed up at moments in time with advice, guidance, or to open a door that put me on just a completely different path. So we started to kind of brainstorm about how do we become that at some scale for more people like me who are coming up. So through FFG, we invest in underrepresented founders at very early stage. We give them cash and a bit of business support, because we find those founders sometimes aren't ready to go to VC. They're not polished enough to pitch and win, but we understand them a little bit better because we're from that background. And we do a lot of mentoring and networking for professionals who are further on in their career. So, we partner people up for 6-month paid work experience placements, so that they can put on their CV that they've, done a job, performed a task, and have real life experience at doing something, in order for them to go on and start their career journey. So it's really about investing and connecting people to others who can shape their career and trajectory. And it's a lot of fun. I'm having so much fun doing it.
Oh, that's tremendous to hear. You are an extraordinary role model in the world of business and much more. My final and actually related question is the one that I ask everybody who comes and joins us on Off the Agenda, and that is that we live in these challenging, complex times where perhaps hope and aspiration are much needed. What lines of support, encouragement, advice and wisdom would you offer to the next and younger generation as they begin and start their own career paths now?
Yeah, I think specifically, well, generally speaking, but more so, for folks who are coming from backgrounds similar to mine, is to understand the extreme unfair advantage that we have having come through adversity, right? So my advantage has often been my willingness to stay longer, to cope a bit more, to deal with adversity, a bit longer than somebody else, to be a little bit more patient, to not need as much, because I didn't grow up in an entitled, well-manicured environment. And often my counterparts or opposition did. So when the going gets a bit tough, I'm more able to win and thrive in those environments because of where I grew up. And I often hear young people describing their current circumstance as their disadvantage. My lived experience is my toughest moments today, are my advantage. So as we talked about earlier, using them to bounce back out, and then finding yourself in those, testing moments, and remembering you've walked through harder than you're faced with today, and probably the other person hasn't. And to me, that's that's the reason to kind of live in eternal optimism, because I know I can beat just about any situation in front of me.
That is a wonderful answer, and it's in many respects making that virtue from circumstance, as you described right up front in question 1. Dean Forbes, it's been an absolute delight to meet you today. Thank you so much for joining us on Off the Agenda. We wish you all the very best with Fortero, for FFG, and very much more, and we look forward to hearing your further stories ahead. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Well, it's been a real honour and privilege to speak with Dean Forbes today and to hear his inspiring story and stories. Thank you, Dean, and thank you all for listening. That's all from me, other than say, as always, stay tuned for more conversations, great discussions, and inspirational guests. Thank you again, and bye for now.